So my mission is to make sure that every young person has the opportunity to be empowered to know what those 3 major red flags are of emotional abuse before they turn physical, and that they know how to start setting boundaries in their life. There's a lot of people with lived experience who are passionate about making a difference, but you've really got to wait until your nervous system is regulated and you've done the healing to be able to go out and speak about these things. And if that hadn't happened, I'm honestly not sure that I would be here today.
Welcome to Mission Activated, where we bring you the stories of individuals who've awakened to their true purpose and are living a life of passion, impact, and alignment. I'm Aveline Clarke, your host, and I believe that when you're on mission, everything falls into place. Here, we share the journeys of those who've discovered their unique path and embraced their soul's calling. It's not just about making money in life and in business, it's about making a difference, living on purpose, and inspiring yourself and others along the way. Let's get to it. My next guest is the lovely Jas Rawlinson. She's an award-winning speaker, a best-selling author, and an advocacy coach who specialises in emotional abuse and domestic violence awareness. She once swam with sharks to raise funds to end child sexual exploitation, and she is all about empowering women to transform shame into strength and to share their story with the world. I am so excited to have Jas on the show, and I hope you enjoyed this one with Jas Rawlinson. Hello, Jas. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me.
I mean, we've known each other for a little while, and the stars aligned in the new year for us to get together on the show. And thank you so much. I'm really excited to have you here to delve into your story and bring out all the magic that you bring, because I know there's a lot there. No expectations, of course, but it can be. I know from someone who's been through a lot in my past, I know what it's like to have to go into the stories again. And I just want you to know that, you know, you're in a safe space, and I understand. And I know my audience will be very understanding as well. I think I just want to start by saying and acknowledging hardship. And I think when we go through hardship, we learn the most. So, you know, the audience knows, you know, I've done an introduction. They know who you are. And anyway, without me filling in the blanks, I want to know about you. First of all, whereabouts are you in the world?
I'm in Brisbane, so it's very muggy today, very hot again, as usual. But yeah, beautiful part of the world.
It definitely is. I'm a little bit south down the road, but on the east coast of Australia as well. So it's nice to speak to someone who's not too far away.
Yeah, well, I grew up in that section of the world too. So that's my favorite. It's just over, like going on holidays, just over the border and going down, you know, to Fingal or Brunswick or Yamba. And I grew up in the Coffs Harbour region. So like this side of Australia, you know,
yeah,
is pretty magical.
It is. And for those listening, because we have a global audience, it is a really nice place in the world where we come from. So, and we're very grateful. Tell me, Jas, how would you describe the mission that you're on?
Oh, so the mission that I'm on is to make sure that every young person, every person basically out there in the world has the opportunity to learn what the major red flags are of emotional abuse. Because we talk so much in society about domestic violence and, you know, leave if it gets physical, like if a man ever hits you, if a woman ever hits you, like whoever it is, leave. But we've got so many people, and particularly our young people, who are going into their first ever relationships, or, you know, they're having some really intense friendships during their, you know, high school years. And they often don't know what to look out for when it comes to emotional abuse. And so it's often not until it becomes physical or maybe even sexual that they recognize that something is really wrong. So my mission is to make sure that every young person has the opportunity to be empowered to know what those three major red flags are of emotional abuse before they turn physical, and that they know how to start setting boundaries in their life. Because, I've often said it's great if you can become a, kind of detective in detecting these red flags or these warning signs. But if you don't know how to set boundaries in your life, then you're just going to keep either gravitating towards or maybe attracting the same kinds of friendships and relationships. So not even that you're attracting it, but you may continue to find yourself in those kinds of situations or meeting those kinds of people and not knowing how to start reducing your exposure to those kinds of people. And it's the boundary part that's really important for that.
Wow. I'm so looking forward to getting into the detail here. What you're talking about is so important. It's nothing that I heard when I was a teenager, and I'm sure you were the same. It's it's quite unique, and yet it's kind of like the building blocks for learning healthy relationships and learning how to navigate one's self and one's way in the world. I wish I had you many years ago. Um, you didn't wake up one day and went and go, "Oh, I want to be doing this when I'm
Yeah.
older." So tell me, I'd like to know the journey. So please take me back, to where it began and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah. Well, it's very sweet. Firstly, thank you for, your kind words. I wish I'd had somebody that could have given me this kind of knowledge, given me this knowledge when I was younger as well. But like many young people, I had to learn this myself many decades later. So for me, growing up as someone who grew up in a household with a perpetrator of domestic violence, where the domestic violence was usually emotional and financial and um, usually anything other than physical, although there were a couple of instances of physical violence, meant that as a young person, I didn't have a language to describe what was going on. I just knew that I felt incredibly sad, incredibly alone, incredibly hopeless. And I thought there's something wrong with me. Um, it must be my fault that my dad hates me so much. I just can't work out why I'm treated so differently to my brother. I can't work out why my mum and I are sort of the main targets of his rage and his control and all these kinds of things. And, you know, obviously it would take, I could go into a whole podcast about all the things we experienced, but just to give a bit of a snapshot of it to help understand why it was so difficult and why it was so scary. Because unfortunately, there are still people who today would think, oh, my parents yelled at me, or my dad used to get really angry, and but he never hit me, or my mum never hit me, so it wasn't really abuse. Well, you don't have to be physically assaulted to be traumatized and to be terrified. Um, and coercive control, which is one of the main forms of emotional abuse that I educate on, is really characterized by this psychological intimidation. So, always feeling like you're walking on eggshells, always wondering when the next shoe's going to drop. When am I going to be yelled at? Am I doing the right thing? Getting home from school and, like kind of listening for my dad's tires on the gravel to like decipher like what mood he's in. Um, Always being busy, never resting. And that's come into the way that I kind of operate these days. I am a bit of a workaholic in some ways. I am an overachiever. I never want to be idling. And I am working on that. But again, that was something that stemmed from growing up in that household with domestic violence and coercive control, is that if I was ever relaxed, if I was, say, sitting on the couch watching TV, I could be a prime target for my dad when he walked in the door, to just be on me and berating me and just to be in trouble, basically. So, my dad, there was a lot of verbal abuse. There was a lot of screaming. There was a lot of fear. There was a day where I really wasn't sure what he was about to do to us. And my mum and my sibling and myself had to duck under a barbed wire fence and run to our neighbour's house across the paddock. And my mum's dress actually got caught on the barbed wire. And I remember like looking back and just in absolute terror as my dad was like sprinting towards us, not knowing like what he was going to do if he caught us. And there was a lot of psychological abuse, calling me fat, telling me I was lazy, I should be in a girl's home. If your mother and I divorce, it's all your fault. So a lot of, psychological, emotional abuse, financial abuse, the coercive control of always wanting to know where my mum was, what she was doing, him having to be in control of where we went, even doing things like hiding the car keys, or as simple as taking the batteries out of the mouse so that we couldn't use the computer. It was the smallest of things and the biggest of things. So it was an environment of constant uncertainty and constant fear, and also thinking something's wrong with me. And so that obviously led to a lot of self-hatred and, things like body dysmorphia as well, which I still live with today. So all of those things came together to really, I guess, mold me into a young woman who was very self-critical, had no idea what boundaries were because I'd never seen those modeled. I was also extremely deprived of love from a healthy male role model. So then, of course, I was gravitating to men who were really emotionally cruel, just like my dad. They didn't hit me, but I was gravitating to the relationships where I understood things or things were comfortable, which might sound really strange to anyone who hasn't grown up with abuse or hasn't been in abusive relationships, but you often gravitate to the thing that feels familiar, even though you don't want that. You want to be loved, but you don't know how to be loved. So you just gravitate to what you either feel is familiar or what you think you deserve. And for me, I didn't think I was worthy of being loved. And so I continued to gravitate to really unhealthy relationships and really chase men who were not kind and not loving and didn't treat me like I deserved to be loved. And all of that culminated in more trauma. And I had my rock bottom moment when I was 20, just before I turned 21. And that was really the moment where I said, that was my catalyst moment, really, because I went, I have to change something. And I don't really know how to do this, but I just know that I don't want to be in these situations anymore. I don't want to experience another sexual assault. I don't want to be in another toxic relationship. I don't want to feel terrified everywhere I go that something bad's going to happen to me because of all the things I've experienced. So that was the moment where I said, I have to do something different. And I'm going to start by and I actually don't know what made me think of this, whether it was because I just started university and I was starting to study psychology, but for some reason I said, I'm just going to start looking at the things that people say to me and then looking at their actions. And I'm going to see, like, does this person just tell me I can trust them like all the other people who have hurt me have, or do they show me that I can trust them? Are they loyal? Do they show up on time? Do they treat me with respect? If I do speak up very, very hesitantly and tenderly and tell them that I'm uncomfortable with something, do they listen to that? Or do they just walk all over me and tell me I'm being too sensitive and stop making a big deal? So that was the start of it. And, obviously there's probably a lot more we can talk about if you want to go into anything deeper, but that was the beginning of it. But it was a good 10 years before I began to do any advocacy around the issues that I advocate around today of domestic and sexual violence. And it was a lot longer after that before I started my own business and before I started to, speak in workplaces and schools about red flags and boundary setting and all those kinds of things. And there's a lot of healing that had to be done as well, which I think is an important note to make, because there's a lot of people with lived experience who are passionate about making a difference, but you've really got to wait until your nervous system is a lot more regulated and you've done the healing to be able to go out and speak about these things and be safe yourself to do that and to also be able to help other people.
Wow. Yes. Oh, there's so much in there. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sorry, I had to stop because I was like, there's a lot there, but that's kind of the snapshot of it. And then, yeah, what inspired the beginnings of this journey that I've gone on.
Wow. Um, you had a sibling. Did he have a similar journey or was he not a target?
He had a very different journey, and I think it's important to note that he has his own trauma. Um, as like lovingly, I would say he was the golden child kind of archetype, which doesn't come without its own pressures and anxieties and trauma. But he definitely had a different experience where my mother and I were really treated as inferior because we were female, and because he was male, he was the son. It was a very different experience for him.
Mm, mm. Did your mum get out?
Um, she did, but unfortunately not. I guess not in the way that I wish she had. And like I acknowledge how hard it was for her trying to keep my dad's moods at bay, but um, unfortunately, and fortunately, my dad made a decision when I was 18 to actually take his own life. And so that gave us freedom, but it was also another layer of trauma. And that explains also a lot of why I was a very traumatized young woman who didn't know how to set boundaries, and was acting out of my trauma constantly. But so we I couldn't say this back in, say, 2004 because people wouldn't have understood, but I know a lot of people understand now. And I've had a lot of people at presentations and events come up and, thank me for saying this. But it really was a relief. And I think if that hadn't happened, I'm honestly not sure that I would be here today because my dad's rage and his actions were escalating. And there were more and more dangerous things that were happening, including, when we were in the car together and things he was doing in the car that could have killed us all. Um, and so I think he made that decision because he knew that he couldn't get on top of what the darkness that was inside of him. And that's not something any of us wish. We wish that he would have just accepted the support that he was offered many times and that he would have listened to my mum and gotten support. But, he made that decision. And thankfully, that did give us freedom, but it came with a cost for all of us as well.
Yeah. Wow. Absolutely. It's thank you for being so transparent on that. Must be what a tough and intricate journey. We've all got journeys, don't we? We've all got the story, and it's not.
Yeah.
We all have different
And nobody's,
paths.
I mean, I still look at many people and think, oh gosh, the journey was so much harder than mine. And I think about people who do have abusive parents or partners who are still around. And as a result, they're not able to be as free with their stories as I am, or they're still living with fear. And so, I mean, I certainly compare myself to a lot of people and go, oh gosh, I had it pretty easy. I got out of it pretty easy and got on with my life. But at the same time, it wasn't just oh, my dad's out of the picture and everything's great now. Um,
Yeah.
there
No.
was so much trauma to unpack there.
Mm. If anything, that was kind of like the start of the next phase, wasn't it? Of
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
go and figure out who you are and heal and
Mhm.
go on the journey. So, at what point did you decide you wanted to help people with this?
Oh, I always had a feeling that there was something greater that I wanted to do, and I think part of that is being a very highly sensitive and neurodiverse person. Typically we want to make a difference in the world, but then yeah, there was just a part of me that felt like I wish I could help people, and really make a difference. And I mean, that was something I thought about when I was a teenager, when I would be lying in my room, listening to my dad raging or, writing in my diary, just kind of hoping everything stayed quiet. I used to have these grand designs as like probably 10 or 11-year-old, or maybe more like 12 and 13, where I think, I wish I could invent like this secret necklace that has a little microphone in it and it can record what's going on, because of course we didn't have mobile, like we didn't have smartphones and anything like that. So I was like, I wish I had this device that I could just press a button and it could record my dad when he's saying these things, so that I had some kind of proof. And then it also had a button that would just call like the police straight away. So I definitely had these ideas of like, I don't want anyone else to go through this. And I wish I could like create something that would help women and children or anyone experiencing this one day. But then I forgot about that for a long time because I was in survival mode and trying to just survive for a long time and then trying to heal. And so it wasn't until I was about age 30, um, I had been working as a magazine writer, and I was doing some features on domestic violence and important social issues. And it was around that time that a friend and I decided we really wanted to come together to make this permanent memorial in Brisbane to honor the lives of people across Brisbane and Queensland who'd, been murdered by domestic violence. And we wanted to have this permanent space just on the outskirts of the city where family could come and, sit by the waterfall and um, think about their loved one, and not always have to do that, say, at a cemetery. And we wanted something that was more permanent than, say, like a candlelight vigil or something like that. So we created and we opened this memorial, and we had media there, and the Lord Mayor came and was part of the opening of it. And it was a really beautiful thing. And I guess because I was interacting with a lot of survivors at that time, I started to have people, say, well, what's your story? Like, why did you create this memorial? And I guess that was the very beginning of me opening up a tiny bit about it. And then it was probably in about the next year or so that I decided to write my first book, which was part of a suicide prevention series, really, I guess, kind of inspired by what I went through with my dad, and then just not wanting other families to go through that, not wanting other families to lose a loved one in that way. And I decided to create this book, which I called Reasons to Live, One More Day Every Day, which later became a series of books. But that first one was just a book of 10 stories from people around Australia who'd been through some really excruciatingly difficult things, but found a way through and found a way back to loving life. And when I was writing that book to really champion other people and other people's voices, but I kept having the participants like ask me, like the co-authors ask, well, like, why are you doing this? Like, I guess there was a little bit of hesitancy with some of them. Like, I just kind of want to understand, like, why you're doing this. Like, why are you writing this? Why are you interviewing us? Um, and eventually, yeah, I think I had a few people say, you really need to put your story in this, Jas. Like, it's it shouldn't just be you writing an introduction and then having our stories. Even though I was the ghostwriter for a lot of the stories and I'd written them, and it helped each person to write and edit their story. Yeah, they were like, "You should have your story in here," and I had to really battle that for a while. Um, but then eventually I thought, "No, okay, I'll put my story in there." And then that was, I guess, really the start of me stepping into the next part of my journey around really being an advocate around mental health and domestic violence and some of these issues. And it was a gradual journey. I became became more bold over time. I became more confident in my message. And that eventually led me to, I've written 4 different books now. I've had my own business since 2018, something like 2018. And it was the start of me beginning to move into public speaking and eventually, what I do today around teaching about red flags, boundaries, and all those kinds of things. But yeah, as I said, it was really about a 10-year journey from my rock bottom moment until I started to do any kind of speaking or advocacy. And I'll be 40 this year. So it's really been the last 10 years of my life that I've been doing this for. And I guess, yeah, growing, really becoming more emboldened every year in the mission that I'm on, and really, really prioritizing that.
So it's so wonderful to hear the journey that you've been on. And it also highlights how we go through different phases of learning, healing, growth, expansion. It's not as life isn't a straight line, and it does change as we go. And sometimes we don't have the answer to why we're doing something at the time, but I think, just called to it, or we have this internal knowing that we have to do that. It's just something that is part of us. And so you obviously heeded the call within you to go on that journey, which has obviously impacted so many people. So yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's, I'm really grateful for those people around me in those early days that encouraged me, because as I said, I had I guess as well, being a trauma survivor, I had that kind of complex of keeping myself small. And I didn't really want to be seen to be out there and leading the way. I was like, I just want to champion other people and I want to help other people and kind of stay in the background, which is very different to what I do these days, where I am like literally, the keynote speaker, I am the head of the conference or whatever it might be. But yeah, it was lovely that I guess there were people around me that saw something in me and encouraged me to explore that. And then over time, I was able to go, yes, this is what I really want to do. And I guess as I started to have more and more people coming to me and saying, like, thank you for sharing your story, like, your story is just like mine, or, um, you've said so many of the things that I've always wanted to say. Um, and it's incredible, like, even to this day, if I'm ever releasing an article in the media or I've done an interview or something like that, I'll have people message me and say, yeah, like, your story is just like mine. Or I have had a lot of people say, thank you for being so transparent about the combination of grief and relief that you felt with your dad, passing, because, they'd said, like, I felt that way. I felt so much relief when that abusive person died, but I could not speak about it because everyone would have said, what a horrible person. Like, what an unfeeling daughter you are, or anything like that. So getting that feedback along the way over the years has, yeah, just really solidified that I'm meant to be doing this and I'm on the right path. And that, I guess, that keeps me going. And sometimes I try and go back to some of those screenshots and messages I have when I am having hard days or I think I'm not making a difference. Um, and that can be really helpful to do as well.
absolutely. You've answered a few of my questions. I was going to ask you also, was there anyone else that you saw that you looked up to along the way?
Yes. Oh, that's such an interesting question. Little bit controversial for me now, because there were definitely people I looked up to. And what's interesting is that, the people that I look up to have changed over the years. And there were some people that I used to look up to who, over time, and I'm trying to find the way to say this, it's not like in a conceited way, there's no ego about it. But some of those people I came to realize that I really didn't need to be hero worshiping them. And sometimes that was because I'm now on the same level as, or I've gone further than some of those people. So, I used to think I could never achieve these things, and really put certain people on a pedestal. Unfortunately, there's, in the advocacy world, you'll come across people who you might really look up to, and then as you get to know them, or many years down the track, you realize that maybe they're not the person you thought they were, or sometimes, one of those people betrayed me in a certain way and started to copy my work, and things like that happen that make you, really upsetting. But it is interesting because you'll look at people and think, yeah, you really put certain people on a pedestal, and sometimes, and then you realize like we're all human, and some people make mistakes, and some people aren't meant to be in your circle forever. And then you'll realize other people who are, meant to be part of your tribe or who you need to look up to. And that's, yeah, certainly changed for me in some really interesting ways over the years.
Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. Um, and it shows also the level of growth and involvement that you've gone through, as the way you describe that, and your relationship to those people over the time. What brings you now the most amount of joy?
Oh, gosh, I think someone asked me this recently, and I always have a hard time answering it because I am very focused on my work. But I did buy a horse last year because I grew up with a horse, and from the age of 12 until I was 38, I had this beautiful horse named Buddy, and he really got me through like some of those really hard years with my dad. And so last year I thought I would love to have a horse again one day. And so I did buy a horse, and I was actually just out with him yesterday, and I've been having quite a hard time lately with some things, some traumas that have come back up, and I just realized that being out with him, yeah, does give me joy and just is a great distraction from some of those things that come up sometimes in life. So I think, when I'm riding, and it's a good day and he's behaving well, like that's probably what brings me the most joy. And also just being at the beach, like the ocean is one of my happy places. And if I could transport myself up to far north Queensland every weekend and go shell hunting on some of those amazing deserted beaches, like that would be my absolute joy. I just love the simplicity of, some of those things.
Yeah, yeah. Nature is just such a balm for the soul,
Mm,
and I think for trauma victims as well, because it's so
yeah.
calming.
Yeah, exactly. And I was saying to my husband, getting a horse, because he often said to me over the last, 7 months or so, like, this was meant to help you calm down, not cause you more anxiety. Because for anyone that hasn't had a horse, when you first get a new horse, they've got to resettle into a new environment. You're a new person to them. And so it wasn't very calming for my nervous system up until the last maybe month or so. But yeah, we definitely need those things. Anyone who's experienced trauma, it's good to find something that really just brings you back down and grounds you.
If you're loving this conversation and want to dive deeper into purposeful work, then it's time to thank the 6-Star Leaders community for making this episode possible. The 6-Star Leaders are a group of purpose-driven business owners committed to doing business differently by embracing their unique genius and skills to make a real impact. It's a space for learning, growth, and truly becoming empowered in everything that you do. If you're ready to discover your own 6th star, go to bit.ly/6-star community-intro and book a chat to learn more. We look forward to seeing you. What would you say your superpower is?
Oh, I really feel that my words are my superpower. And I have had people say that to me, so I feel a little bit less wanky saying saying that now. But I am a writer, and I think there are a lot of people out there that are like really incredibly poetic, and the way they speak is sometimes incredibly like poetic and insightful. But for me, I'm a really deep thinker, and so I love that deep work that I do when I'm writing books or when I'm writing articles. And I think my words are my superpower, and that's what helps a lot of people and has helped a lot of people.
You mentioned you've written 4 books. Is that right now? 4?
Yes, 4 books.
Wow. Have you got another one in the works or coming?
I am starting work. I gave myself a nice 2-year break after writing my memoir, which was the last book. Anyone seeing the video will see it in the background. But my last book was called The Stories We Carry. And that was a huge undertaking to write that book. So I've had a couple of years off now, and I'm beginning the work on the next one, which looks like it will be my first personal development book. So something a bit different. So I am excited about that, but also a little bit trepidatious as well about getting back into that mammoth kind of work that is writing a book.
Yeah. But I'm sure it's going to be amazing given what you've done already and just
Thank
listening to you
you. It
speak.
will be worth it. It will be worth it. And I might just take it a bit slower this time than some of the previous books that I've really, really done in quite short time frames. So.
Mm. Tell me, I'd love to know a bit more about the advocacy work that you're doing. You mentioned earlier about going to schools and you've talked about the teenage years. Is that an area of focus for you?
Yeah, I do a real mix these days. I still do a lot of stuff in workplaces and organizations, and I love doing that because I find that there are so many people my age and much older generations as well that either, well, I'm really finding very few people who haven't experienced the things that I have, regardless of their age. But there are also a lot of people in older generations who've got, kids and even grandkids now who are starting to experience these things. So when I'm in workplaces, I'll have people saying, oh gosh, I really wish my teenager could be here to see this, or I have a granddaughter or a grandson who could have really used these, could really benefit from these lessons on boundary setting and also understanding what love bombing is and understanding what gaslighting is. And then when I go to high schools, it's tough work, I won't lie, but it's very rewarding as well when you do get those teens that come up and have a chat afterwards, or, come up for a hug and cry and share that they're going through something very similar. And to be able to offer them hope, and obviously I do point them in the direction of where they can get professional support. But to be able to let them know that there is life on the other side of high school, these high school is this bubble, but it doesn't last forever. And there's a whole life waiting for you outside of there. That's really rewarding. But at the same time, there are a lot of teenagers who might have a parent who needs these lessons as well. So that was one of the main reasons why I ended up last year. I decided to create a digital version of Red Flags 101, which is the presentation that I do in schools and workplaces. So I thought I really need to create a digital version of this that can be accessed by the public, and for a very small affordable price as well. And so that's been great to put that out there so that people who can't attend my presentations have that resource that they can access, or somebody who has a loved one, a family member, or maybe a teenager who needs some lessons in boundary setting can direct them to that resource. And my favorite message that I received was from a mother who said, she said, this is cheaper than taking my kids to the movies and more beneficial in the long run. And I was like, thank you. That is exactly what I want. And so now, like, I have a version that I license to organizations as well. So, anyone with employees who wants to be able to help protect and support employees can license it. And then there's also a version that's accessible for the public as well, so that, everyone out there has the opportunity to learn and to be empowered in boundary setting, whether it's with your family, because there's a hell of a lot of people out there with unhealthy or toxic family members they're dealing with, or whether it's intimate relationships or even friendships as well, or
That's
the
great.
workplace,
Yeah. Oh, everywhere we
Yeah.
interact with people. So will we have hopefully we'll have the link to your website. It
Yeah.
should be in the,
I
in the,
will link it, but it
yeah.
is just jasrawlinson.com
Okay.
slash red flags,
Okay. Beautiful.
brings that up.
Yeah.
So,
For
yeah.
those listening right now that just want to jump in there and have a look at it, that's where to go. Wonderful.
Yeah. And I will double check that and make sure that I've got that right, because sometimes I forget something in the URL. But yeah, it is just jasrawlinson.com slash red flags.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Over the years, as you've been evolving and doing different work and serving different areas of society and the community, what's been the most surprising thing that you've seen as a result of the work that you've done, or where you're doing it? What surprised you the most?
Oh, um, gosh, I have to really think about that. In terms of like impact or
Yeah, yeah,
something else?
probably impact and the the way it's received.
There's one story that always touches me, and it was long before I started Red Flags 101, but it all came back to that very first book that I wrote in the Reasons to Live series. And back then, I was on maternity leave, so I didn't have any income coming in. And I had scraped together all of my savings, and then I crowdfunded a little bit extra to put that first book out there and publish it and print it. And one of the people that contributed to that crowdfunding campaign was a young man named Austin. Um, he was from overseas, and I remember he messaged me and shared, like, every now and then he'd say, "Oh, I don't want to push you, and I'm sorry if I'm being annoying, but I was just wondering when the book's coming because I can't wait to read it." And he ended up opening up with me and sharing that he was actually in hospital at that time, receiving treatment for suicidality. And he had made multiple attempts on his life over the years. And, my heart just really went out to him. And I said, like, the book's coming, but here's a digital copy in the meantime, because I just want you to have access to this. And his message was one of the ones that touched me the most after he read that first book in the Reasons to Live series. And he said, this book is my mental health Bible. And he was like, you know what? I just can't believe how many people are out there that have felt just like me. And if they can get through this, then, maybe like I can get through this too. And I mean, that in itself was so touching. But then a couple of years later, it was after I'd started my business. I think I'd written the second book, or maybe even the third. I opened up social media one day and I saw this beautiful picture in black and white of him kneeling. I think it might have even been in the snow, proposing to his girlfriend. And I was so excited for him. And he wrote to me and said, I hope you know that this wouldn't have been possible without you. And I still cry about it now, because, like, I just think about how close, like, how close we were to not having him in the world anymore. And to see him, like, not only thriving, but, like, having a beautiful partner and, preparing to get married was, like, just meant so much to me. So I think that surprised me the most, because at the time I was like, I'm just this girl from the bush in Australia, who wrote a book, wrote a book while she was pregnant, crowdfunded to put it out into the world, didn't really have any money to do much at all. And yeah, the people that wrote to me, like Austin and many others, to say, like, there was someone else that said, like, that she lives with CPTSD, and I don't know who she is. She shared it through another friend of mine, and she said, Reading this book has given me, like, peace for the first time in my life." And I was just like, whoa, I was not expecting that. So there's things like that that blow me away. And I guess because those books are a little bit older, I don't talk about them that much these days. But I still come back to them every now and then and think, that was the start of my advocacy. And that was really me taking a risk and following my intuition and my heart, because I had no idea how well or not well a suicide prevention book series was going to be received. And I definitely had people in suicide prevention organizations telling me not to publish these stories, or to, like, heavily censor them and rewrite all of the heart and soul out of them and just make them these bland, like, don't even mention the word suicide, was what they said. And I said, how the hell are we ever going to get on top of this suicide epidemic in Australia if we can't even use the word suicide? Like there's a big difference between being graphic and, putting in, graphic detail that's not required, which I don't do. There's a big difference between that and, sensationalizing and being clickbaity and allowing survivors to be raw and real about their stories and talk about what their dark times were, but more importantly, how they got through that, how they found their way back to a life that they live. Like those are two very different extremes. Um, so I did really that was also part of me finding, uh, really stepping into more of that leader inside of me and that inner strength and saying, no, F you respectfully. I don't care what your position is or how much you're paid by the government or whatever it is. I am going to support survivors to share their stories truthfully because I know that it makes a difference. I know that it saves lives and I know that it's what other people out there who are struggling need to hear. They don't need the glossy, oh, I had a really hard time and I experienced trauma when I was younger, but I'm all good now. They don't need that version. They need to feel and hear and see that someone else feels and sees and hears their pain, but they've they've found a way through to a brighter life. So I guess that those were some of the really surprising parts of my journey over the years.
Oh, wow. There's so much in that as well. Oh, goodness. So do you think when you went to write that first book, were there no other books like it?
No, there wasn't. Um, and there is now. What's really fascinating is over the years, I've collaborated with another woman who lives in the Sunshine Coast, like not too far from Brisbane here. And her name's Kerry Atherton. And she was writing a book very similar to Reasons to Live at the same time I was doing that. And she has a book series called Stories of Hope, which is very similar. And so over the years, I've spoken at one of her events and, we shared each other's work and things like that. But at the time when Reasons to Live came out, there were no other books that I could see that I ever was able to research and find that were like that. Um, and even still, there are some differences between books, that are similar today and the ones that I've written. Um, so it really was like a big leap of faith, and especially to be like a new mom. Like I said, I started writing it when I was pregnant, but I didn't know I was pregnant yet. So I don't know, maybe it was also a little gift from my son, while he was in the womb. Uh, but as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I was like, oh shit, like I have to finish this soon because who knows what my mum brain's going to be like when my baby comes along. So, there was I really did push myself and work very hard to find, these 10 people from all across Australia, from, tiny little Aboriginal communities in Western Australia to hip hop artists like Elfresh the Lion, all kinds of different people. But yeah, it was a real book of heart because I didn't know if it would be received well. And the second and third book were done because there was such a great reception to that. But still, every time it was like, do people want more of this? We're just going to have to wait and see.
Sounds like you were a trailblazer, so to speak. You were
Thank
breaking.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of course I don't know. It's not something I was looking for at that time or have been. But for those listening to this, they might be listening to your story and everything that you've talked about and thought, oh wow, I haven't heard of Jas's books. That's something I need. I'm going to go check that out now.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I've seen a huge rise in co-authored books over the past, oh, like 4 or 5 years. And that's not to say there was never a co-authored book before I did that. I'm sure there were, but I never saw anything out there with stories of suicide survivors. But I started to see like a lot of stories after that, maybe specifically of domestic violence survivors. But I'd seen, I guess what's interesting too is because in my background of studying psychology and creative writing and being a writer and a freelance journalist and then publishing my own book, I'd seen enough of badly done, I'd seen some really badly done projects that had all of the best intentions and great heart behind them, but weren't well executed. And so I knew I didn't want mine to be like that. I wanted the book to be beautiful. I wanted it to be in color so that, you've really felt the life of these stories. And even that was a really amazing story because originally I only had enough money to print the first book in black and white. And then my publisher at the time, and I have to sort of note I don't use that publisher anymore, but at the time that publisher rang me up and said, I don't know how to tell you this, and I hope you're okay with this, but I think the person who was printing your book had a look at it and they saw what it was about and they just went ahead and printed them all in color. Are you okay with that? I was like, oh my gosh, like, are you serious? Like, that's amazing. And then, yeah, I later found out that person, I think at first we thought it was a mistake. And I was like, well, that is the best mistake ever because having each person's photo in color is just going to bring so much more life to the book. But then he was like, he saw it and he just went, this needs to be in color. And he just did it. And there was no extra charge. So that was kind of like a God thing too. Like if, or however you see it, the universe or, I think that was definitely a God miracle. But yeah, there's definitely not a lot out there at the time, or there was a lot of sort of badly done work out there. So I really, really did the work to make sure it was beautifully done and that each survivor felt like these books were like a permanent little memento for them of their story that they could leave as a legacy for their own kids or share with their family or other people around them. And that's what I wanted to achieve with, the whole Reasons to Live series.
Mm. I love that. I love the way that the universe or magic or divine intervention comes in and it was obviously meant to be. I have been thinking as you've been talking, Jas, and I'm just thinking about, I guess, the work that you've done, and you've obviously crossed a number of sort of top categories of all of this and with the different books that you've written as well. Would you say that what you talk about with Red Flags 101, is this something that do you think every teenager should know? Is this something that
Oh, yeah.
everyone needs to know?
Yeah, I believe every single teenager out there needs to know this. And I do have something big that I want to launch this year, a big campaign, which I won't talk about now. I might scare myself out of it, but it is a really big mission to ensure that a gigantic number of teenagers and vulnerable people in Australia have access to this. Because the only way we're going to have a hope of decreasing sexual assaults, sexual violence, domestic violence is by ensuring that young people know how to set boundaries. Because unfortunately, I can't stop what's happening in individual houses, especially with young people who might be growing up in a similar situation to myself or much worse. They may not get out of those situations until they're old enough to be on their own. But if they have access to this information, they will understand, right, okay, this isn't a problem with me. My mom or my dad or whoever it is actually gaslighting me. They're twisting, the reality of what's happened. They're telling me, no, it's your fault this happened. Or they're telling me, that never happened. I never said that. I never did that. It'll help them to at least understand, like, this isn't a them problem. This is that person's problem because they're an abuser. Or it's going to help them to understand that, okay, this person's actually love bombing me. This isn't genuine love and care and romance. This person is actually trying to control me. And it's also going to help them to set boundaries so that when they are, if they are stuck in a family kind of situation, when they are able to get out of that, and hopefully, they can get out of that as soon as possible with the right support, at least they can start to set boundaries that are going to stop them from continuing to go into those situations or continuing to be used and abused as they get older. because that was the thing for me. It was like, if my dad's not here, everything will go back to normal and everything will be perfect. And I will just live the most perfect, wonderful life. And that was the complete opposite. And until I started learning how to speak up and have boundaries, nothing changed. So I believe every single young person needs to understand. And it can start early. You know, we have a 7-year-old son and we teach him about body boundaries, and he's great about that. You know, like if he forgets his towel and I need to take the towel into the shower, like he will say to me, "Don't look at me, mum," you know, or like, "I'm getting changed." And he's great too. Like if he walks into my room, which kids always do, and you're in the middle of getting dressed, he's like, "Oh, sorry," you know. So he understands about body boundaries, and, you know, we teach him as well about, you know, respecting people's boundaries. And if they don't want to hug you, they don't have to hug you. That goes for mum too. If mum's all touched out and I say, like, just give me a cheek kiss today. Like, no more kisses all over me. Like, you know, my kissometer is through the roof. And that's part of being a neurodiverse person too. It's like, I love you, but mummy's like cuddle meter is all maxed out right now. You know, we teach him those things early on, and every kid needs to understand their own personal boundaries and also how to respect other people's boundaries as well. Doesn't have to be this big thing like of oh, you're talking to your child about adult concepts. It's like, no, it's just the basics, and it starts young.
It does. It really does. That's so important, Jas. I love what you're doing. I love everything that you've done. I People like you come along. You know, I've interviewed a lot of people for another podcast, and they were all people that've gone through traumas. So I've experienced a lot of stories. I love how you've brought your path, your learning, your experiences into your healing, you know, and also the combination of your psychology degree, your creative arts, and your writing, your journalism background gives you the perfect combination of, you know, the skills to actually bring this to the world and language it and deliver it, communicate. I love how you're just evolving on the journey and what you're doing for people, kids, adults, grandparents, everyone. Um, and giving it a voice, which obviously needed to happen. So,
Thank you.
yeah, really grateful for you. Tell me, where can people get or how can people get into contact with you or your work?
Yeah. So, for anybody out there who has a story and they're really passionate about getting their story out into the world or writing their story, first of all, I do have a great um, free resource. It's a free masterclass that anyone can access if they like. So, just go to jasrawlinson.com and you'll see it at the top. You can access that. So, I just fell off my wall behind me. Goodbye. They can access that masterclass for free if they just go to, jasrawlinson.com slash superpower. I think I'll make sure you have the link. And also, if anybody wants to enroll in Red Flags 101, or if you want to gift it to a loved one, I often say it's really great to gift it either to your teenager, or maybe you've got a sister or a brother or somebody who could really benefit from these insights into boundary setting and red flags. Just go to jasrawlinson.com slash red flags. And then, you know, it's easy to find my books if you just go to jasrawlinson.com. And you can find me on social media. Just search Jas. It's Jas with an S, so JAS Rawlinson, and you will find me on Facebook or Instagram.
Wonderful. Oh, so grateful for you, Jas. Really am. And I think that I know for myself, I want to get the Red Flags 101 for my teenage boys. I think that's certainly a plus and a must have. And I know the listeners would be thinking and feeling the same. So I'm sure they'll be going to your website and checking out, you know, your work further. I'm
Thank
so
you.
grateful. I always
Oh,
like,
thank you for such deep conversations too. It's great to like talk about some of these things that and some of the advocacy and work I've done that I guess haven't talked about for quite a while, and to go on a bit of a deep dive. So I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's so important. It's important to, for you to have the space to share what you're doing. This is the mission you're on, and it's making a big impact in many people's lives. And it's not just Australia. This is worldwide as well, because your work is accessible to anyone. I like to ask my guests, to leave us with maybe just a piece of advice or a tidbit or a little nugget, something that you'd like to finish up with.
Oh, I have to think about that. Well, one thing that I'm really big on, and this is kind of a hint about my next book, but I definitely believe that our trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence. And sometimes people get upset with me saying that. But it's not to, belittle any of the experiences that I've had or anyone else has had. Obviously, you have to get to a point in life where you are physically and emotionally safe to be able to start the healing journey. But I don't believe that the trauma has to be this life sentence where it then means, well, I can never try to achieve that dream that I have because, you know, it's just beyond my reach, or I could never be worthy of this, or I could never do this, or I could never have a healthy relationship. I am someone who's come from incredibly dysfunctional, toxic relationships. And, my husband and I just celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year, which was really special. And it's not to say that like it's always easy. Of course it takes work, but I don't believe that trauma has to steal a healthy, happy future from us. We can still find joy. We can still find purpose. We can still find things that give us, a sense of hope and purpose for the future. So that's one of the biggest insights that I like to share with people. But also, I believe that our, vulnerability really is a superpower. Like that's probably one of my other superpowers that I would say. And a lot of us who are sensitive or we're trauma survivors or we're neurodiverse, we've been often told that we're too sensitive and we need to be harder or we need to be more like, certain other people. And I just reject that completely. The older I get, the more I really try to accept myself. Obviously, I still work on things. I'm not just going to say, well, this is the way I am. So I'm not never going to work to make certain parts of my personality or certain things easier for myself. But yeah, just learning to accept those softer or sensitive parts of ourselves and learning to become more vulnerable because so much healing happens when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Um, it really is a superpower. And so I really encourage people out there to share your story with at least one other person. Maybe it's a best friend or maybe it's a family member who's a safe person to go to. Obviously, don't share it with family that are not understanding or supportive of you. But I really encourage everyone out there to find one person to share their story with because you'll be amazed at how your story can help to change somebody else's life or maybe to help them to go on a healthier, brighter path as well.
Thank you. There's a lot in there, just in that last few minutes of what you said. And it's so true. So very true. Jas, I want to thank you for your time and your energy, for being with me today, for sharing everything you have. I'm so grateful. And I'm sure the listeners are as well. There's so much to be gained from just hearing you speak, but also from knowing that we're okay, and there are others that have been through this a lot worse, have survived, and like you just said, no trauma is a life sentence. That's what I
Absolutely.
that's what I got from you, and I believe that too. I do. It can take time, of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
and effort,
It's
but
not an overnight thing.
mm,
And we need to be gracious with ourselves. I mean, I still live with CPTSD and that impacts me in certain ways. And I'm a heck of a lot better than I was in my 20s. It's quite minimal in a lot of ways, but it doesn't mean that I don't still experience trauma. But at the same time, I don't let that trauma steal a future from me. And I think that's the biggest message.
And it's such an important one. Very powerful. Thank you, Jas.
I really, really appreciate your time. And it's been an honor to be on the podcast. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I look forward to being in touch soon. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Mission Activated. If today's conversation resonated with you, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Remember, your mission matters. When you live on purpose, not only do you transform your own life, but you inspire others to do the same. Until next time, stay aligned, keep activated. I'll see you then.